Hi, everybody. Welcome to a very special edition of Katrina Rasbold and Friends. And this is someone who genuinely is my friend. And I'm thrilled to work for this gentleman. I'm thrilled to be on the earth at the same time as this guy. And he doesn't know he's been a mentor to me, but he sure has. And is genuinely one of the, I would say, 9 or 10 people that we can call pioneers in pagan everything. And this is Oberon Zell. Thank you for being here, Oberon. Do you want me to call you Oberon? You want me to call you Oz? What do you like?
Either way is just fine. I answer to both. Just don't call me late for dinner.
No, I wouldn't do that. I want the entertainment.
Right. Okay.
So to put a little bit of framework, I'm gonna share a picture here, just real quick, everybody. And I'm still not real good at this, but I'm gonna do my best. Where did it go? Here we are. And where'd it go? Hold on, wrong one. Sorry. Said I wasn't very good at this. Here we go. This is going on. Nope, I did it again. There we go. This is when I met you, and this in person. I, of course, knew about you well before then. I want to say this was the 2012 or 2013 Sacramento Pagan Pride.
Oh yeah.
I think Sierra Madrone Grove or somebody like that had brought you in. And I was just so pleased because we got to share a pavilion together. This was my first year to be out in the world as a writer. And you were just so gracious and wonderful. And I was quivering, all a quiver inside. And part of that was because I had picked up an issue of Green Egg magazine at a little place called Al's Feed Store in Sacramento. And no, that's not true. It was way back it was at Wellsprings Books in Claremont and Montclair, one of them. And it just spoke to me on such a deep level. I enjoyed it so much. And there was that name on the cover. And here was this man right in front of me. So you've done so much to contribute. You recently told me, very recently told me, you're in over 100 books.
Yeah.
And you've written not quite that many, but quite
Not
a few.
quite. No. 21. 21 so far. Got a bunch
21.
more in progress. I've always have several on the hopper that, I'm compiling, and then eventually I get to the point where it's time to put a cover on them and send them off.
You and I work backward in that way. I have trouble getting a feel of the book until I've got the cover. So I end up doing the cover first, and then the book comes from there.
Well, sometimes the title or a cover idea predates the book by decades. For example, my book, Goodbye, Jesus, I've Gone Home to Mother, I had that title 30 years before I actually wrote the book, because they said that is going to be a perfect title for a book someday. And
Well, it sure
eventually it
is.
was.
So how old were you when you now you helped pioneer the application of the word pagan to what we do. And at what age did you realize that you were relating to that word or that had meaning for you?
Well, that's a very interesting question. I'd always grown up kind of immersed in the magical world. My very first reading in the Childcraft books, which I actually have a set that Rhiannon
I
got
do
me right here
too.
behind me. You do too, so you
I
know
do.
about them. They the issue, the volume on myths and legends of all peoples and nations. I love that, and and I remember very well that my very first story that I remember was from that book, and it was a story of Demeter and Persephone and Hades, which, of course, you can see for yourself. And it
Yeah.
just inspired me in totally. In the book was as I checked on it, they didn't even refer to them as gods and goddesses; they're just as characters. But there was something about it that just caught me. And I went from there into fairy tales and mythology of all peoples and loved it all. Just fascinating. And it all bespoke a world, a kind of a magical world, which is the world beyond my home. And, and since I'd grown up in a home in a suburbia, it was never any thought that that was it, the whole world. There was all this world out there. Well, part of the world out there wasn't just foreign lands and countries. It was also the mythical, magical realm of fairy and mythology and all of this stuff. And eventually I traveled to places like ancient Greece, and South America and all kinds of legendary places, and had wonderful adventures exploring the ruins and museums and all kinds of cool stuff. So I always had an affinity. I always felt that was my world. That was my country. I was truly a native of this magical realm. And I think I still am, So I came upon the use of the term pagan in that application, though. Um, oh gosh, right around 1967 or so, when we were discussing coming public with this Church of All Worlds idea. When we read Stranger in a Strange Land, me and my first few friends in college, I went off to college in 1960. I should back up a little bit. 1950s is when I was in high school, and it was just exactly like the movie Pleasantville. And like all the high school stories and movies and TV shows and comic books that all take place in the 50s, that's what it was like. Suburbia in the 50s, and it was all white, and all Christian and all suburban, and people played golf and all that kind of stuff. Totally typical. And then in 1961, I graduated and went off to college. So I was in college in the legendary 60s. So I was right there in these legendary times. In the high school days, in all these stories and TV shows and movies and comics, you've got kind of a beatniky character in the high school scene. Well, that was me. You know, I was the Maynard G. Krebs or the Jughead or whatever, character.
Mm-hmm.
And, but I was that. And then I went off to college and I was that character. And the best depiction of my college years, I think, was the movie Animal House, which was pretty much exactly how it was when I went off to college. And Stranger in a Strange Land came out that year as a novel by Robert Heinlein, who carried me through my high school days with his annual juveniles. For over 12 years, there was a new one every year. And it was sort of like the Harry Potter books of my generation. I'm sure you recall some of that stuff because you look like a fangirl yourself. And so this was the next one in the series. And it was like, wow, and it was exactly right. The timing was perfect. I was right there for it.
I
It's
love
like,
that mix when things just come together like that.
I know, I do too. It's so magical. It's like if you were started reading the Harry Potter books when you were 11, and then, that would be number one when the kid's 11. And then next year when he turns 12, you're 12, and you just stick with it right there. That's a special privilege to grow up with a series like that. Anyhow, so we formed a water brotherhood inspired by Strange and Strange Land, which carried us through college, and we introduced a lot of other people into it. So by the time we graduated, there were about 100 of us, but we were still kind of a secret fraternity, a secret society, hidden behind the curtains of thing. We published a newsletter, the very first underground newsletter ever published in our college, and we called the Atlan Torch because we called our group the Atlans, ATL, which is an Aztec word for water. We were very nerdy, back in those days, and that has not changed either. It's just that nerdy has become more acceptable to be. You know, it's now the cool kids are the nerds. Which is great. We thought we were, but not everybody else did. Anyway, after we graduated in 1965, we just continued the publication. I continued publishing and discussed whether or not to continue staying this kind of underground society or go public as the Church of All Worlds. And inevitably, we did what we always do. We decided to do it all. So we branched into two sister organizations: the Atlan Foundation, which eventually became the Association for the Tree of Life, and that was headed up by my first water brother, Lance Christie, and the Church of All Worlds, which I was chosen to head up. And Lance and I were like Kirk and Spock to each other. That was our relationship, total Kirk and Spock. Him being Spock. And those who know me and my reputation will understand that distinction, I think. So when we first decided to go public with the Church of All Worlds, I hadn't really given any thought to what category we fit into. It just hadn't occurred to me. We were just the Church of All Worlds. There's nothing in the book that mentions anything about it being a particular category of religion. But when I first came out, somebody asked, they said, well, so what are you? Are you some Christian group or some Eastern thing or what? Because at that time, funny religions were coming out of the woodwork. I mean, we had the Krishna people and the Moonies and just all kinds of things coming up. So, having given that background that I described in mythology and cultural anthropology and all the rest of it, I said, well, I guess you could say we're pagans. It seemed like the thing to say because I had seen an article by Kerry Thornley, who was one of the founders of the Discordian Society, um, in which he suggested that pagan would be a good identity, but nobody around that he was talking to was into it, just his little article, which I have included in each edition of the Church of All Worlds membership handbook, of which I can give a little pitch. There is a new edition, the final first fancy one, the fourth edition, the first bound edition of the Church of All Worlds membership handbook. And I reprinted his article on functional religion, and he uses the term pagan. So when somebody asked me, I said, well, I guess you could say we're pagans. And I hadn't given it much thought, but up to that point, nobody had ever claimed to be pagan. See,
Yes.
pagan was always a derogatory term applied to other people, those pagans. It was never us pagans. But with me, it was. And I said, well, this church I'm starting, it's a pagan church, and I'm a pagan, and we're all pagans. And so that's how it began. And a few months later, due to some help from one of our early people, Ravi Kristen, who's still around and living in Los Angeles at this time, after all these years, he gave us some money to incorporate, which we did. And we got our incorporation the following 6 months later. March 4th of 1968, we got our incorporation. And we took over a coffee shop that had been run by a consortium of Christian groups on Gaslight Square, which is sort of the Haight-Ashbury
How
of
appropriate.
St. Louis. It was. We had a big corner, a big 5-story mansion on the corner with all of it cost $75 a month to rent the place. And the basement was this coffee house. And then it had all kinds of other stuff. So we took it over because it wasn't giving them what they wanted. They were hoping to convert people, but that didn't happen. So they found out, well, we're a church, maybe we'd be interested in taking it on. So we were, and we did. And that was kind of how we first became public, really. So once it came out, people started coming to us, people coming to us to do weddings, people coming for counseling, people coming to the coffee shop. We had, live entertainment, just the whole thing. It was the beatnik coffee shop hippie era of the late 60s. And we had a lot of fun with it. So but we needed a little to let people know what we were doing. So shortly after we took over the coffee house and got our incorporation, I decided, well, I'll start a little newsletter of that. So on Ostara, on March 21st of that year, 68, I published the first issue of a new publication called Green Egg. And the reason I called it Green Egg was that we had first become public doing a fundraising to get a copy machine so that we could, in fact, print out little stuff. And then those were the days when it was a spirit duplicator or ditto machine, as they called them, which came in several colors of ink,
And
all
smelled
faded.
amazing.
Oh, it was. They had a faded red, which wasn't exactly pink, just a very faded red. They had a faded purple, which was, well, it wasn't really lavender, it was just faded purple. There was a faded black, which could only be described as gray. And then there was a green. And green is a color that you can fade all you want to, and it still looks like green. So that seemed like a good color ink to use. It was readable. So we came up with the idea of having 3 publications, one that would be for the public, and one that would be for the members, and then one that would be just for the clergy. And each of these would be color coded. So the public one, we'd call it green egg, because egg is like the beginning, the thing you don't know what's in the egg until it hatches, so that seemed good. And the second one for the members only would be called the scarlet flame, you know, which seemed appropriate. And then for the inner circle of clergy, it would be the violet void. And we eventually did publish all of those over the years. Although right now, Green Egg is the only one currently in publication, but I hope to get the others revived again.
Sounds wonderful.
And that's how it began. That's how the whole thing. So the first thing would happen is that I would hear about some other group somewhere, almost always on college campuses, because that's where all this stuff was always happening, just like we had started on a college campus. And there would be groups that were doing exploring. Oh, there was a Latin club, you'd have the Greek club. There'd be some people studying Egyptian stuff or Druidry, things like that, as kind of a special interest or study groups. So I would send them Green Egg, which we talked about being pagan, and say, you guys sound like pagans, and we're pagans, and let's all be pagans together, la di da. And people all said, yeah, cool, that's it. We're pagans. Let's all be pagans. And shortly, several of us founded the very first pagan alliance, the Council of Themis, which lasted a few years before it eventually fell apart due to internal decision of people who didn't like some of the other groups that were members, and things like that happened. But nonetheless, we did start it, and we started a pagan movement because now we had a bunch of people, a bunch of different groups and religions who weren't just a Greek group here or a Druid group there or a Viking group there. We're all pagans, and that was really quite profound. And I think that's the thing I'm proudest of in my life, is founding an entire religious movement.
Well, it's still profound. And what I was thinking as you were talking was that was a similar time as when Buckland was coming through as the father of American witchcraft. And
Right.
I wondered when he partied on, or when the witches came around and said, we're pagans too.
Right, right. Well, that took a little bit of time. Oops, I'm sorry, I've got to turn this off.
That's okay.
Go. Damn it. Go away. I'm sorry, I can't make it stop.
That's what
Yeah,
she said.
yeah, yeah, right. Anyway, I should have turned it off before we started. So, well, Ray Buckland, see, here's the interesting thing about it, is that we didn't think about witches in those days. We were looking at all these groups that we tend to think of as pagan, but witches were not them because they were not considered to be a religion. The popular mythos about witches was that they were like a sort of a subspecies, like vampires and werewolves and fairies and stuff. Witches were in that category. And this was confirmed by all of the popular stories about witches, which included I Married a Witch and Bell Book and Candle and Bewitched, and then it still goes on with things like practical magic and the craft and so on. And the people who first came out and said they were witches, Sybil Leek with her Diary of a Witch, and Louise Huebner and Justine Glass, they all wrote their personal biographies, and they all said the same thing. They all said, well, this is in their family, it was in their blood, they inherited this from their grandmother or whatever. So nowhere was there any presentation that witchcraft was a religion, something that people who were not born into it could study and join. It was all like in the movies, in the TV shows. So we didn't think about that. And then, and then on one of my, then a person name of Susan Roberts wrote a book called Witches USA, and she was from New York, and the book consisted of interviews with a number of prominent witches in the New York scene. Now, the New York witchy scene was pretty much straight out of Bell Book and Candle in that time, and this was 1971 or so. But I was heading out there for the um, Boston Science Fiction Convention in 1971, and I contacted her because we were publishing Green Egg. I contacted Susan, and she made arrangements to introduce me to all of these people that she'd written about. So I got to meet all the witches of the New York area, including Ray Buckland, who had opened the Witchcraft Museum on Long Island, and his wife Rosemary, and people like Leo Louis Martello, and well, just a whole bunch of really interesting witchy people. And so we brought them in, and they said, "Yeah, we're pagans. Witchcraft is a kind of a pagan thing too." And the Gardnerian tradition of witchcraft. Gardner had come up with the idea of calling witchcraft the old religion, which it never had been really in the old days. Of course, it was, it wasn't a religion. The witch wasn't a priestess. She was usually an old lady widow living at the edge of the village with her herb garden. And you'd have the village witch, and you'd have the village blacksmith, and you'd have the village basket maker, and so on. And it was a craft, you know. It wasn't, but that's okay because it allowed witches to use the identity of religion to gain the benefits of religious freedom in America, and an emerging such of that happening in England as well, and eventually other countries as well. So being a religion was a lot of advantages, which is what Robert Heinlein pointed out in A Stranger in a Strange Land that inspired us in the first place to form a church. Never would have thought of it before that. But he said, well, you can start a church. And we said, really? Wow, how do we do that? And he explains how to do it and gives it a good example. So we said, well, that's cool. Let's do it. So we formed the Church of All Worlds, and many others have then pursued that particular path. And now we have a vital religious movement, and and I've had the privilege of being a part of it from the very beginning, and it's cool. I love it.
It's just fascinating just to hear you talk about. Now, there's another word that millions of people identify with that hadn't really been spoken until I think it was Morning Glory, and that's polyamorous.
Ah, yes, right, right. Well, she and I kind of coined the word, although I like to give her the credit because it was her article that it was first used. But in Stranger in a Strange Land, it was the first science fiction novel to address a whole bunch of things that are part of the human condition: love, sex, relationships, theology, afterlife, politics, money, all kinds of stuff were introduced into that. Priestesses, goddesses, all sorts of neat things. And and one of them was the idea of multiple loving lots of people, sexual love, sexual relationships, multiple ones and stuff, without the jealousy issue. And he did that by redefining love in the most profound statement of the entire book, which was in the 1961 edition that had been edited by him personally, but unfortunately is not in the unedited version that his widow released many years later, which many people now read and think that that's the authentic version. But unfortunately, in the process of editing an overlarge, rambling book down to the really tight masterpiece that Stranger in Strange Land became, he rethought some of the discussions and conversations. And there's a very lengthy one that talks about love and relationships and sexuality and jealousy in his initial draft that he whittled down to just a couple of pages that were really tight and excellent. And in the process, he defined love as that condition wherein another person's happiness is essential to your own. And when you proceed from that definition, it changes everything. It
True.
does.
True.
It's about the other person, for instance. It's not about you. It makes love being about the person you love, not about how you feel, but that you care
Oh,
for
I'm
them.
sorry. I didn't mean for that to show. Go back.
Oh, well, you'll get to that. Okay.
I'm still
So,
listening.
so that opened up. So in the book, there's, people are having lots of lovers and it's all cool. So, Morning Glory and I have been operating on that premise all along because we'd both been inspired by Stranger when we were coming of age. And it just seemed perfectly natural to us. We were just, not into monogamy particularly, but not into cheating or anything like that, really. Just into open love. Seemed all right. What's not to like, really? And well, many years later, in 1990, we were in a partner, well, four-partner eventually group marriage with Diane Darling and Morning Glory's ex-husband Gary and our three kids that we all had from our previous marriages. And we were happily living all together and doing just fine as a family. And Morning Glory got in a conversation with Diane about some other people that we knew who were trying to do an open marriage thing, but not doing a very good job of it because they were like sneaking around and not telling people what they were doing and that kind of stuff. And she said, they're just not following the rules. And Diane said, well, you're always talking about these rules. Why don't you write an article for Green Egg about the rules of having open marriages, open relationships? So she wrote an article and she called it Bouquet of Lovers, which we
Yeah.
published in the Beltane issue of Green Egg in 1990. And in the process of writing articles, she wanted to have some language that didn't exist because it wasn't about polygamy. Polygamy means marrying multiple people.
Mm-hmm.
And we weren't talking about marrying people, we're talking about loving people. And there just wasn't language for that, really. I mean, poly had to be a term in there somewhere. So, what does that mean? Poly is many, many lovers, many love. And so we kind of groped around, and eventually, after several ideas and discussions thrown out, we came up with the idea of polyamory, and that just seemed to stick. So that's what she put in the article, and it started a whole new movement. People now had a word for it. It was like pagan. There were people who were practicing stuff and doing things, but they didn't have a name for it that united them with each other. I often think of one of the great wizards of history was Benjamin Franklin, and 250 years ago, Ben Franklin came up with a term that changed the world. Up to that point, there were different colonies and different religions settled into the New World. There were Virginians and New Yorkers and Pennsylvanians, and there were, Methodists and Catholics and Protestants of various sorts and Puritans. There were people who traced their ancestry. There were Germans and French and English and so on like that. But there was nothing that united them really. They were all their separate little colonies. And he coined the term American
Mm.
and got people to start thinking of themselves as Americans, which united all those things. You could be all that stuff and still be that, but then you could also be American. And that made possible the American Revolution. And pagan as a concept made possible a pagan movement. And polyamory is a term that made possible a movement of love that has apparently become huge. I mean, now apparently there's millions of people, claiming to be polyamorous and having wonderful relationships that are, kind of eliminate most of the romance novels and crime stories and, in a lot of movies and TV shows, but I think are a lot healthier for everybody involved.
Well, we can just call this the importance of umbrellas.
Exactly. Have an umbrella, keep the rain off,
Keep everybody dry. And
keep everybody dry and everybody sheltered together under the same umbrella.
I think everybody likes to belong, and they
They
like
do.
to have a name, for lack of a better term, of the club that they're in, where everybody's relating on some level. And so
Right.
it's comforting. It lets you, especially the types of people who were being drawn into these ideas and ideals,
Right.
I would also say, they were often the outsiders. They were people that weren't in the cool kids club.
Absolutely.
And
Because
suddenly
if you
what they're
didn't have
doing,
a group, then we had to form our own.
for sure.
So we formed a group of outsiders, much like the clan of the cave bear in the stories. There, this is the loose ends who don't get picked up by anybody else, and the Animal House fraternity idea, which is what we actually did in college. We formed our own little fraternity that wasn't of all the rejects. I was the only one in the whole group who actually got initiated into a real fraternity. You know, which I resigned after a year or so. But and the first person ever to do that too, and the first person to get married and have a kid while in college and have our own independent apartment, which
Mhm.
which became quite a little haven for all kinds of fun stuff. Yep.
You're talking about doing all this stuff in college. How long were you in college, sir? That's a lot.
You know, 5 years if you count graduate
Yeah.
school. But
Wow.
you know, high school only lasts 4 years. But if you see all the movies and TV shows and Archie comics, you think it goes on forever.
True.
You
And
know,
you don't see very many people that go to college and during their time in college do multiple things that are going to change the world and change the conversation.
yeah, I never really had much time to study, but fortunately I didn't have to. I would read all the textbooks in the first couple of weeks, and then I was all I needed. I knew everything I needed to know, so that was good for that. So then I had time to do all this other stuff.
Well, idle hands are the devil's playthings. Aren't they? You got busy.
Yeah. Well, my hands have never really been idle exactly. You know, they still are. We joke about that all the time. We joke about our copious free time and saying, we're just so busy we don't even have time to procrastinate. We'll get
Now,
around to that someday. You know.
so the picture I accidentally popped up, I wanted to show, and that is where is add to the stage? Hold on. Well,
Okay.
see, and now it's fussing with me. I
Ah,
will get good at this. I really will. Now this is you. Come on. No,
well, that's no,
that's
but
morning
that's not
glory.
me. No.
I well, when I pulled up the picture of you, it went into picture mode, and this was the last one. So this is morning glory with a couple friends of yours.
Yes, Queen of the Unicorns. Yep.
Can you talk about the unicorns a little bit? That's not something everybody gets to say.
Well, that's true. Probably not everybody. No. Well, the thing is, when Morning Glory and I got together back in 1973, um, we had 40 years together before she died of cancer 11 and a half years ago, and they were amazing, amazing adventures, amazing stuff. We were quite a force. And early on, one of the many things that we had in common was a love of fantasy and mythology, including mythical beasties. Like so many of us, we were into things like dragons and griffins and stuff. And we thought um, we got talking about that, and the subject came up of what were the true stories behind the legends. That there must have been something that sparked the legends to go. And we thought around about that time, Peter Beagle's book, The Last Unicorn, came out. And in it, there's a witch character, a sort of a gypsy witch character, named of Mommy Fortuna, who has a traveling menagerie, and she calls it Creatures of Night Brought to Light. And we thought that would be a cool idea for a book. You know, wouldn't it be neat to write a book and tell the true stories behind all the myths and stuff? So we made that our first kind of project, and we started doing research. In those days, there was no internet. You couldn't Google anything. You know, you had to go to libraries and get books, which we did, all towards this book we eventually wanted to write. And one of the critters that we found we were researching, of course, was unicorns. And in the process of that research, uh, I came upon the secret of the unicorn, which had eluded people. But unicorns were not a mythical beastie, in fact, you know. In fact, very few of the ones we call mythical beasties are actually mythical. All of them have some basis in reality. I mean, there's multiple bases for dragons, not the least of which is dinosaurs. I mean, the world really was ruled by dragons for a very long time. So they were real. And turned out unicorns were too, but they were not a species, as people assumed. They were an art form, kind of an animal husbandry art form that was created by secret process that had been discovered, lost, and rediscovered a number of times throughout history. And as I got all the information on this together and we started looking over, we figured, well, this will be a great chapter in our book, man. We'll have a whole chapter in the book, and it'll be all about unicorns. See, this is the book. We did eventually write the book, A Wizard's Bestiary. But we also said, well, if maybe we could actually raise unicorns, wouldn't that be cool? And we talked to some friends of ours, and particularly Allison Harlow, who had just bought some land up in Northern California. called Greenfield Ranch. And she said, well, I got this property. I have 220 acres, but I can't really live there. I just wanted to have the property as a place to go and camp out and all. But if you guys want to move up there, um, you can be my caretakers and raise unicorns. Sure, what the hell?
Oops.
So we did, and and we did, and we started the process, and we did research, and we built facilities, and we traveled all over the place to try to find the right breeding stock, and got the right animals, and brought it all together. And in spring of 1980, our very first unicorns were
Oh.
born.
Mm.
And that was Lancelot and Bedivere. We named them after Knights of the Round Table. And that was an amazing story. That began one of the greatest adventures of our lives over the coming years, which we traveled all over the country. We went to every Renaissance fair in North America, including Canada. At one point, we had 4 different animals with 4 different people out there. We had Morning Glory with one, me with one, Diane with another one, and my son Brian with another one. And we were like all over the place. It was an amazing time, absolutely amazing time.
So,
We were also publishing Green Egg again during that time. We revived Green Egg after a hiatus after we moved from St. Louis to California. Green Egg kind of went into a hiatus for a few years. And so we picked that up again eventually. But first, it was the unicorns. The first ones were 1980. And in the next few years, were travels and Ren fairs. And then in 1984, our agent who had set us up with the Ren fairs managed to make us a deal with the Ringling Brothers Barnum and Bailey Circus for a 4-year exhibition lease with the greatest show on earth. And so our unicorns went off to join the circus. And here's a picture of Morning Glory and I in the summer of 1980 with our very first baby unicorn, Lancelot. He was so cute. He was the first one. And and there we were. We were so young in those days. Yep.
and for any newbies who are watching this, just remember this is pre-Photoshop. So this is real that you're
This
seeing.
is real. Oh yeah. It was all
And
real. This is way pre-Photoshop.
so this
Yeah,
is
and
a
there's a
poster, right?
yep, there's a poster from the
So
circus.
how many of the unicorns went on to be in the rings here?
4 of them. We sent 4 of
All of
them
them.
off to join the circus. Well,
Amazing.
eventually we produced a total of 9 unicorns over the years. A couple of whom we kept as pets. One of whom we farmed out to a local sheep ranch who was having troubles with coyotes. And since unicorns had originally been developed to defend the herds against predators, in exchange for letting us use their clippers for grooming our animals, we let them keep one of our unicorns there. And he was a giant, great big huge unicorn. We wanted to see how big we could get them and how small we could get them. So we had a tiny little miniature, and then we had a great big giant one. And we sent the big one off to kill coyotes, which he did. And we kept the other one as a house pet, which was nice. So it was quite an adventure there, and they
Indeed.
took it worldwide, made the unicorns incredibly famous. We were everywhere. We were on every TV show. We were in every magazine and books and newspapers and just all over the place. It was huge. The circus eventually said it was the most successful animal act they ever had in the entire history of the circus, which is pretty amazing considering that they introduced the first big African elephant, the first gorilla, and giraffe, and several very spectacular animals that they introduced. But the unicorn was the star of the show forever. It was huge. And in the meantime, we were living in the woods. You know, we had
So,
pet deer too, as well as unicorns. And after a few years of that, we moved out of the woods and back into civilization. And I got involved in computer work, and then we decided to reissue Green Egg again, and we picked that up in 1988. And that became what we did in the 90s, was publishing Green Egg and reviving the Church of All Worlds that we'd kind of let languish. We just disappeared out into the woods
mhm.
where we lived at Greenfield Ranch. It was a hippie community, about 100 families on 6,000 acres. and the Church of All Worlds acquired 55 acres of that, which we still have, and they're still having things out there. And it's the there are two hippie communities: the Church of I'm sorry, Greenfield Ranch in California, and the farm in Tennessee. They were
Mhm.
both founded in '72, and both continue going on. And those are the oldest, longest running hippie communities in the world. And we were a part of the one, and I visited the other numerous times, and are very dear friends at the farm as well, since it's close to here.
And that was Stephen and Ina May.
Yeah, yeah, the Gaskins,
Yeah.
Stephen and Annie Gaskins. So
Yes.
you know about the farm. They
Oh,
died a while back, and the
Spiritual
farm
Midwifery
continued.
was one of the books that changed my life in a huge way as
Oh
well.
yeah,
And so I was very connected to that. I worked as a midwife and doula, and
did you now?
I did, but this was a
Oh,
very long time ago in New Mexico. And so that was at the time of the Taoist midwives having all the things that they were going through. But Ina May was our she literally wrote the book. Let's
yes,
say
she
that.
did. She did. Well, that's amazing. That's wonderful. Yeah, I've got very good. I don't know if you knew Alana and Jason and Ty, who are some of my friends out there.
I was
And
never out there. I never actually got
oh,
to
no.
visit the farm. I just
Oh,
admired it from afar.
well, Diane had actually lived at the farm for a while
Mhm.
too, and done bookkeeping and stuff for that. But she had a falling out with them, and didn't really have nice things to say about them when she joined
Mhm.
us. So, but there's a lot of connections there, you know.
Sure. Well, they also started in California, did they not? And
They did. They did. They
Berkeley,
started
though,
as a
that
study
area.
group that
Yeah.
Stephen was doing, a Tuesday night study group of some sort.
And he was sort of an Alan Watts type of theologist
Right.
speaker.
But he was also a cult leader, basically, and that's the
Yeah,
difference between the farm and Greenfield. Is the farm was a cult, and
right.
Greenfield was anything but. It was just a bunch of hippies homesteading. We were, yeah, nothing could be further from cult, I think, than this.
There
You
was
know,
a
people talk
oh, go ahead.
people
Sorry.
talk about organized religion and how they don't like organized religion. Well, paganism is definitely not organized religion.
Disorganized. There
We're a
was an article,
disorganized
right.
religion.
There was
Right.
a documentary that was released not too long ago about the farm. It was not flattering.
Oh,
Not flattering.
yeah. Well, it still has that. And uh, we were talking, or well, my pagan friends there, Alana and Ty and Jason and all, who I just saw at Samhain. They came down to Serenade for Samhain together. Wonderful folks. And their daughter, Alex, is an amazing young woman. I've known her growing up, and now she's a grown woman in her 20s and stuff. But I've known her since she was a little kid. Wonderful people, and they're pagan. And they said that they wanted to try to host pagan events there. They thought, well, it'd be great to have some big pagan gathering there. And oh no, the rest of the people, oh no, we don't want to be doing those pagans. I said, we're pagans. What are you talking about? Well, they've got a wonderful swimming hole, one of the most beautiful swimming holes ever, and you have to wear a bathing suit. So I contemplated after Stephen and Ina May died that maybe I would go and live at the farm. And I looked into that stuff. And if I can't go skinny dipping in the pond, I'm not going to do it.
That's fair.
Not going to work for me. So
Deal breaker.
yeah, that's a deal breaker.
That's great.
Absolutely.
So, with everything you've experienced, and that's means something different when I say it about you as opposed to saying it to your average person, because the frame of reference is quite expansive. What do you think happens to you when you die?
Well, that is a very fascinating question. I've given a lot of thought to that, especially after Morning Glory died. In fact, I wrote or co-wrote a trilogy of books addressing that subject. The first of which was called Death, Rights, and Rights, where the primary author was Judith Fennelly, who'd been the death doula for Morning Glory's passing. And so that deals with dealing with the dying. It's about that. But my contribution has to do with rites of passage and what comes next and that kind of stuff. And the second book in the series is all mine, and that's called That Undiscovered Country. And so that's the kind of a handbook for the newly departed. for the dead. This is the journey. This is the maps of the afterlife, and explored and illustrated many of the afterlife options in different cultures. Quite a few of them, really. And I had a lot of fun drawing the maps and the pictures to go with that. And so that's what that one's about. And then the third book, which I just finished a little while ago, is about the next time around, about rebirth, about reincarnation and growing up. And that one was inspired by many, many years of my watching the little pagan kids at the festivals, and thinking, man, next time around, I want to grow up in the pagan family, because I didn't have that before. I was the only one. But now there's a whole community. So, but I'm figured I should make a handbook for them. So when they get me, they'll have some idea what to do about it. So I wrote Handbook for Our Future Parents, and that's the most recent one. And there's a chapter written by someone at the farm on magical birthing, you know, which is appropriate from that. So
Certainly.
that was all good. Elena, as I said, was someone who wrote that. So yeah, what do I think happens? Well, I have this concept. I have several concepts actually, because it's a multiple thing. One of them is that our lives are like we're like vessels that are we're cups that are dipped into the well of souls, and scooped up a bunch of soul stuff, and it's all a part of us, and we're that, and we're the vessels and the containers, but we're the content, we're the water that's in the vessel. But eventually, the vessel, gets broken or emptied somehow, and if it's water, the water flows back eventually to the ocean, and then it evaporates and goes up into the clouds and comes down as raindrops and flows into rivers and back to the ocean, and it's a perpetual cycle. And I like that. I think that works really well as a concept, because I think soul stuff can be the water is a great metaphor for spirit in that sense, and it's often used as such. It's
Hmm.
often talked about that. So that's one. Another one is the idea that we are surrounded by layers. We are like concentric spheres that we're at the center of. And the next sphere out is Gaia, the entire living planet that we are a part of. We're embedded in this greater sphere. And beyond that is the sphere of the dreaming, that realm that we all go to in our dreams, in which Neil Gaiman has done such a wonderful job with in the Sandman graphic novels and TV show. And and there's several connections to that, and there's one that is a fairly new innovation that is between this realm and the dreaming, and that is what some people are calling cyber guard. The virtual realm that's out there, and it's one that we can create and enter and go back and forth freely and consciously and join with other people. But it also connects to the dreaming as the next level off. And the dreaming that connects to all kinds of realms of imagination. It connects to fairy and Oz and Narnia and Wonderland, and all that kind of stuff. It's all part of the dreaming connection. And I think that the Sandman series shows that really well. Well, beyond that is the level of the afterlives. You know, is that there's a passage. You go through the dreaming to the afterlives, and maybe you'll just stay in the dreaming. Morning Glory has been in the dreaming mostly since she died, because she keeps showing up in dreams. She visits me constantly in dreams to this very day, and other people too. I hear from people all the time. Oh, Morning Glory came to me in a dream, and she gave me this message to give to you, and so on. So she's hanging out in the dreaming. But the doorway from the dreaming to the afterlives is pretty permeable. So there you've got all the afterlife realms. You've got Valhalla, you've got Elysium, you've got Anavan, you've got the Blessed Isles, you've got all of the different afterlives that different cultures have. The Bardos, you know um, all of them. They're all out there. And the next level beyond that, the next layer out would be the realm of the gods. Heaven and Olympus, and all of the realms of the gods. And beyond that, cosmic consciousness. We've now been able to create reconstructions of the structure of the cosmos itself. And that structure is indistinguishable from the structure of the neural network in the human brain.
Hmm.
It's a structure of consciousness. It's a network of consciousness. And the only other place we see that exact same structure is in the mycelial network that
The
that
mushroom.
that is just beneath the grain. It was just like the neural network of Gaia herself,
Mm.
which was beautifully illustrated in the TV series Motherland Fort Salem, which, if you haven't seen, is a fabulous and very authentic TV series proposing an alternate history in which, from the period of Salem, the witches become part of the American Revolution and continue on to this time. But it's a very parallel history. They show maps of how the world looks and so on. And the mycelium of Gaia is a very important part of that storyline, culminating in an amazing finale that I will not say anything about because it's so cool. I want people to watch it. So go check out. It's several seasons and 10 episodes per season. So it's a long watch, but it's well worth it.
What's it called
Motherland.
again?
It's called Motherland, Port Salem.
I'm writing this down, y'all.
And the witches are now a good part of the military. So it's mostly takes place in a military structure there. But the witches are very authentic witches, and they have hand fastings and they have celebrations of Beltane and Samhain that are very authentic. It's
Hmm.
like they did a really amazing job with it. Clearly, the writers know about what they're talking, so it's good. So let's see, afterlives. So I think that these are not incompatible. I think that all this stuff works together. Um, so that's basically my thoughts, and it's based on experience. I personally, as many people do, have reincarnation experience. From my former life was my maternal grandfather, and I was born in 1942 as the direct result of the Japanese um, attack on Pearl Harbor on December 1st of 1941. And my father decided that he had to join the Marines and go to the South Pacific and fight the evil Japanese, which he did. But he figured before he left, he should engender an offspring in case he didn't come back, or in case he did. Either way, I wanted to perpetuate the line. So that's how I got conceived and eventually born. And my birthday is coming up in just a couple of weeks, November 30th. So I'm looking forward to turning another trip around the sun and still being here to do it. So that's good. And I'm in great shape to do that. I'm far too busy to slow down. So, you know, anyway, my grandfather died just before that of a heart attack. And his room in the big old house that they had in Kirkwood, Missouri, near St. Louis, was turned into the nursery. And I went to sleep in my bedroom, and I woke up in the same bedroom and was surrounded by the same family that had been there before when I had gone to sleep last time. And they were all standing around and looking at me. And I remember this very clearly. And they were all standing around looking at me, and I was looking at them, and there was something very strange. And I was like, what? And I couldn't speak coherently. And I kept trying to say something, and I got more and more agitated and upset. And I started crying, and I hold up my hands in exasperation, and I look at them, and they're little tiny baby hands. And it was like, what happened to me? And that's how I began this life. And throughout my childhood, oh, and I was raised by the triple goddess. My father was off there in the South Pacific, just like in the movie, and I was raised by the maiden, my aunt Betsy, my mother's sister, who never married, and the mother, my mother, and my grandmother, the crone. I was raised by the triple goddess for the years while my father was away until he returned, which is pretty trippy because I didn't think of that at the time, obviously. And and I have many memories of my childhood which are very confusing in my mind because they're like snapshots, where a photo album has been taken and then all the pictures have just been tossed up in the air and are laying around. And I pick up these pictures, and these are my childhood memories. But some of them are from this life and some of them are not. And I've asked my parents over the years to help me sort these out. And they said, well, that didn't happen to you. That happened to your grandfather. But I remember that very well. I mean, one of the most dramatic was this giant snapping turtle that lived in the backyard in my memory. I remember this turtle very well. And I remember that they called him Rastus. Now, it's kind of odd to have a giant alligator snapping turtle living in your backyard,
Indeed.
but that's what I remember. And eventually, we took him to the zoo, to the St. Louis Zoo, and they put him in with the alligators and other turtles, and he was the biggest one there. And for decades after that, clear up to the time of Morning Glory, I would take people to the zoo and point out Rastus. Well, that great big one over there, that's old Rastus. Except that that didn't ever happen. Except that Rastus was something that my grandfather brought back from one of his many annual camping trips, where he would go away for the summer and come back with something. One year, apparently, it was a squirrel that sort of took over the house. They had a pet squirrel. And one year, it was this giant snapping turtle that he kept in the backyard.
Mm.
And to me, that was a part of my memory. I totally remembered it all the way through, except
Mm.
it was my former life. And there's a bunch of those. And so they would say to me, things, oh, that's just like your grandfather. You sound just like your grandfather. That's what your grandfather always used to say. Yeah, your grandfather was into that too. You know, I inherited a cigar box full of bird's eggs and other weird little things like that from my grandfather.
Mm.
But they never talked about him, so I don't really know anything about what he was like, really, oddly enough. I wish I'd thought to ask, but I never did. And they're all dead now.
Did your grandmother seem to have any kind of recognition in you that you were your grandfather?
I don't know. I think it must have been the case because she was very fond of me. We were very, very close. And but as a kid growing up, in a new life, I had absolutely no idea what to make of a relationship like that. And I think that my parents and my grandmother and my aunt didn't talk to me about that because they didn't want to encourage me to to have this,
Mhm.
because this was weird stuff to them. They really weird. It was many, many, many years later that I just had a conversation with my father, and I don't know what we are talking about, but he said, "Well, I've convinced him to believe in reincarnation." Because he was a Christian and he did not believe in reincarnation officially. You die, you go to heaven or hell, whatever. But and he said, well, you take people like Beethoven, and they're barely old enough to walk, and they're playing the piano, and where did they learn that, and things like that. So he decided that I had to be reincarnation, and we had quite a conversation about that. And he confirmed that he felt that I was a reincarnation of his father-in-law.
Hmm. So
Well, there you go.
I'm trying to imagine with everything you've done. Now, another thing I know about you that I think a lot of people that follow what everything you've done know is you always have a lot of irons in the fire. You're
I
always
do.
juggling a lot of different things. Do you have anything left on what they call the bucket list? Anything that you still want to do that you haven't done yet?
I do. I do. I still have a little bit. I want to go hot air ballooning. I've never
Mhm.
done that. I really want to do that. Um, I managed to go tandem hang gliding in Guatemala a few years back, which was quite wonderful. But I'd really like to do more of that, and I'd like to get one of those little hang glider, no, little parafoil paraplane that has a propeller
Mhm.
that either the kind that's like a bicycle that you just ride and takes off, or even more exciting, the kind that's a backpack you essentially strap on and you just up there tootling around. I'd love to do that. I've been looking into that. I saw some videos that were pretty neat, and I came up with an idea for a personal balloon, uh, which would basically be a backpack with a burner and a balloon, a parachute harness and a backpack that you could just have as a personal thing. I came up with this idea, and I haven't seen anybody doing that, so maybe I'll have to invent one and try that out. But first, I'd just like to get into hot air ballooning. I actually took a class in hot air ballooning, and the culmination, we were supposed to actually go up in a balloon, but then it turned out to be the day we'd planned to do that was stormy and rainy, and the whole thing
Mhm.
was canceled, and I never did it. So I hope to do that someday. I've watched, balloons going soaring above the fields in the forests on some of these special events that they have for, wine and balloon trips. So that's on my list. There's a few places I'd like to visit that I've never visited. I'd like to go to Thailand. I've got friends there, and I'd kind of like to check it out. And I'd like to go to Egypt probably. Um, I'd like to go to Ireland. Haven't been to Ireland. Um, I'd like to go to Stonehenge. I managed to get over to England for the eclipse of the sun in 1999, August 11th of 1999. See, this is a problem I've also got is my brain is full of so many details and I don't have a delete button. I can't get rid of them. They're all there. Anyway, but it was too crowded. There were too many people and we couldn't, getting around was almost impossible. So I couldn't get to Stonehenge. I'd like to do that. I did see a lot of other cool stuff though over there. I've been to Paris a couple of times, been to Greece, Crete, um, Peru, Guatemala, Ecuador, Costa Rica, Hawaii, Australia. I love Australia. I've been there several times. I got lots of friends. I'd like to go to New Zealand. One of my flights to Australia stopped in New Zealand to change flights, and I could just look out the window of the airport. And this is Middle Earth. I really want to go out there and spend some time. And
Sure.
apparently, I've got a friend who was over there recently, and he says you can go to Hobbit Town. They've got all those things still set up as tourist attractions.
Mm.
I'd love to do that. But otherwise, I'm in pretty good shape for stuff. I've just
Yeah.
I've got lots of books I want to write. I've still got more to do. Morning Glory compiled a whole scrapbook, the Unicorn Adventure here. And what I want to do with this is to make a coffee table book, a big coffee table book
Mm.
that uses all of her scrapbook stuff and all the other stuff that I have on it. And I think that would be a really cool thing to do. But I got a bunch of other books. Rhiannon and I are working on a book together called A Wizard's Guide to Witchy Women.
I love it.
I figure with both of our experience, we should be able to make a pretty good one. So we sent out interviews to a whole bunch of women and a number of men as well, with a bunch of questions to ask that would be utilized in the book. And so, yeah, I think she's cutting her teeth on this one that she just wrote, the Pagan support guide, which we should talk about here.
Yes.
And that's her first book, but I got 21 of them. So, but I have a lot in the hopper. I got a lesson from Robert Heinlein on how to write books. We corresponded for years, and he said that what he does when he's got ideas, and he kind of talks about this in Stranger in a Strange Land because he's a character in the book, as you know, as Jubal Harshaw, which is pretty much him. And he says that he gets ideas for things and he writes them down on a 3x5 card and puts them in a shoebox. And eventually, when the shoebox is full, he's got a book. All he has to do is put them out and organize them and sort them out. So I thought, well, that's a pretty cool way to do it. So I get ideas and notes, and I write little things and little essays and interviews and editorials, and I put them in folders for this would go into this book or that book and so on. Like I mentioned before, the whole um, unicorn story is a part of this book here, but it's along with many, many, many other stories, which all kind of started off as notes in a folder. You know, oh, here's one on dragons. I'll copy that down. And oh, here's a neat thing on basilisks, and here's something really cool on the griffins. And eventually, we had a book.
Your box got full.
Yeah. So I've got a bunch of those in the hopper as well. More things I want to write.
So you mentioned
You,
Rhiannon, and you recently got married.
we did a year and a half ago at Beltane. Well, at May Moon Magic actually, which was a little after Beltane. It's Serenarid, which is a pagan property in Tennessee that has been around for quite a long time. In fact, Rhiannon had been one of the founders of that community back, I don't know, 30 some odd years ago. And there used to be an annual Samhain gathering called the Highlands of Tennessee Samhain Gathering, HTSG, that uh, that were sponsored by a couple, Lady Amethyst and Lord Taliesin, and through the 90s. and or yeah, it was through the 90s, right? And they brought Morning Glory and I out year after year to attend. And Rhiannon was one of the founders of there, and she was out there. And so we had kind of met in passage. She was married to a wonderful fellow named Serpent, and I was married to Morning Glory. And Serpent and I hung out a lot together because we would sit out and get stoned together. And she's allergic to weeds, so that's so Serpent and I developed a nice relationship. But then he died, and then Amethyst and Taliesin died, so they stopped having the event. Once you're dead, you stop doing a lot of things. Um, yeah. So and then Morning Glory died, and eventually my path brought me back to this part of the country, and I attended one of their Beltane gatherings a few years ago, and Rhiannon was there, and he came over and started talking to me, and one thing led to another, and I was kind of looking for some place to stay at that time. I was hoping to acquire a home in the area. Maureen, in fact, had invited me to come out here because she wanted to get a house that we could both share, and that she would only be kind of part time, but it would be a place where I would have a place to put my stuff. And I've been on a quest for several years on my walkabout, looking for a home and someone to share it with. That had been my mission. And eventually, I hadn't found either really exactly, but I've been staying one place or another over the years. In fact, I spent 2.5 years staying in the state of Washington at a hippie retreat center, a really wonderful one called the Longhouse in Redmond, Washington, which is still going strong. It was founded by a fellow named Nirav Pendavan with the Church of Venus. And I had actually visited them a couple of decades before that, just in passing. And then he invited me to come out and move in out there. So I was there for 2.5 years, and it was pretty cool. But I was kind of spinning my wheels. I did write several books when I was there, so I wasn't unproductive, and it was nice. It was a nice place. It was a beautiful place actually. It had big pool and a Stonehenge and all kinds of neat stuff. So I highly recommend visiting it. But it was also kind of a cult, and I really wasn't looking to join somebody else's cult, or start my own really, although I had my own religion and church. But it was kind of hard to fit in that sense, because I
Sure.
wasn't there as a member of the cult. I mean, I was friends with everybody, including including Nirav, and he's a very benevolent cult leader. I mean, he's a good teacher. He's an excellent teacher. A few years older than me, and definitely fading, but we got along great. But so I hit the road again, and spent some time various places before I finally ended up uh, at Maureen's place in North Carolina. So then I went to the Serenades Beltane and connected up with Rhiannon, and she said, "Well, I've got a spare room, and since you're looking for a place to stay while you're trying to get this house hunting project done, you can come and stay in my spare room because my daughter's left to go off to college, and I have an available space." So okay, so I came here. This is the room, and we got to talking. The more we talked, the more we realized that we had in common, and that we really fell in love, and grew closer and closer. And so on the 4th of July of that year, the year before last, um, we went out to Washington, D.C. for the 4th of July celebration and to visit the Smithsonian and experience the fireworks show at the Capitol Mall and all that with her daughter, Diana, who is a wonderful woman and totally pagan. And she just got her black belt, and we're going out there for her black belt ceremony after over Thanksgiving. So it's all interconnected, neat stuff. And I prepared what I hoped would be a very compelling proposal. First, we've stopped and visited Rhiannon's sister on the way, and I asked her for permission. And when we got out there, I asked Diana for permission, but I hadn't told Rhiannon anything, because I had to do this right. So it came time. There we are, gathered on the steps of the Lincoln Memorial with a million other people, looking down over the reflecting pool to the Washington Monument at the far end. And it's getting dusk. It's about 9 o'clock at night, and I had again made little arrangements and talked to. She went off, to use the restroom, and I talked to the people right around the area we were, and made my arrangements. So when it came time for the fireworks, I said, "Oh, let's go down to this little flat level spot just down here, and I want to get a picture of us together with the fireworks." And Diana's a photographer, and so she said she'll take the picture. And Rhea says, "I don't know, man. It's pretty packed. It's like sardines in here. We'll never get down there." I said, "Yeah, I think we can make." So I tapped the lady in front of us on the shoulder, and as Rhea described, she said, and the crowd parted like the Dead Sea, you know. And we just got a pathway right down there because all the people around us all knew what was happening. And we got down there, and she turned away to check with her daughter about the photography. And I went down on one knee, and she turned around. She thought I'd collapse because we'd walked 9 miles that day. Seriously, they have this little wrist thing that tells you how far you walk. 9 miles we walked.
Wow.
It was a lot of walk. I'm glad that I've lost a lot of weight since then, because I don't want to try to do that again. But anyway, so there I was. So I held up the ring and asked her to marry me, and she barely had time to figure out what was going on enough to say yes. And then the fireworks went off, and the crowd cheered. Well, the crowd cheered from us, and then the fireworks went off, and then the crowd cheered again. And Diana took pictures, and that was the engagement. I figured that was a proposal that I had a pretty. I felt I could put all the stops to guarantee a success.
Well played. Clearly it worked.
Thank you. Thank you. Some things you just got to do right, because you only got one shot at them,
True story. So I know you have books that have just released, and you have books that are coming up. What would you like to promote? What do you want our viewers to know about?
Well, that's a good one. The most recent major book, of course, which came out about a year ago, I guess, is History's Mysteries, and I think you reviewed that.
I did.
The most recent one that I've got out is The Hunting of the Ree, which is the story of our adventures in 1985, when we mounted a diving expedition to New Guinea in search of mermaids. And I found them too. And it's about, some of this is in the video about me that you can see on my website called The Wizard Oz. It's right there in the front. And it's got some video clip from the expedition. But this is the whole story, including the title comes from a marvelous little story by Lewis Carroll, author of Alice in Wonderland, called The Hunting of the Snark, which is a very hilariously funny thing about a very unlikely bunch of adventurers in search of an impossible creature. And that seemed like a good one. So as we were doing the journey, Morning Glory wrote a poem based on that, exactly the same style in fits. And I illustrated it. Oops, it's hard to really get the light to show this right. Well, I'm not really getting it to show. Anyway, I did the illustrations, and but it sat for 40 years. It's a lot of it because she never finished it, and there's a reason why she never finished it. But the expedition ended in tragedy, but was successful, and this is the whole story. The story from the first reports of these creatures in the Cryptozoological Journal, which we got into and was founded right at the same time as we were doing the unicorns. And we got picked up by those folks because we were the first people to actually successfully come up with a mythical beastie, i.e. the unicorns.
Sure.
So we got connected with the cryptozoologists, and their journal had this. The first issue had this article about these mermaids, and so we figured, well, what are we going to do next? After we'd made the deal with the circus, we got some money. So, well, let's go and have an expedition to search for mermaids. So we got together 13 people and did an expedition. And here's the whole amazing story. So it's a true life adventure into myth and mystery and real life stuff in the backwoods of New Guinea and the coral reefs of the Coral Sea and in search of mermaids. And they're in the book. So that's one I'd like to promote. And then, of course, I just recently completed a couple of books for the Church of All Worlds, our long overdue fourth edition membership handbook, and a clergy handbook as well, which I don't seem to have a copy of right here, but it's also out. And those have been long anticipated, and I finally got around to doing those. And new members will get a copy of the handbook, and clergy applicants will get a copy of the clergy handbook as part of the membership fees that are involved in that. So I think those are pretty good. So this gives the whole history and story of the Church of All Worlds, everything about it over all these decades. It's all there. And the clergy handbook has that. And then to top it all off, brand new, hot off the press,
Yes.
is Rhiannon's first book, The Pagan Support Guide, that she has been inspired to do by our current political work. Is that we had hoped not to have to do this. Really, our plan had been that we would get through the election. We were poll workers for the election. We were actively involved locally in the local scene. And we thought everything was great. We went to bed that night after the voting, I thought, okay, tomorrow morning we're going to wake up and, in Kamala Harris is going to be our new president. We're going to have an amazing, wonderful world. And so we woke up and somehow it was Germany in 1933. And what happened? And I was extremely depressed for a while after that. I was posting really dismal, grim things on Facebook about it. I changed my banner to a blown out candle, of all that. But you can't keep a good man down, as Gwydion used to say. Just can't stay there forever. So I got that out of my system and said, okay, well now we got to get to work, because all the stories have time when some really grim, awful time comes down and everything is really dark and dismal and the bad guys have taken over, and it's time for the heroes to arise and to form the resistance to fight against the evil empire or whatever they got to do. And wizards are needed for this. You got to have a wizard to explain to the heroes what's going on. So I figured, well, I guess we got a job to do.
Happen to know a wizard, did you?
Yeah. Well, my life has been lived largely according to the formula of the Mission Impossible thing. A lot of the stories of heroes involve they fight their destiny. I don't want to go. Why me? I don't want to have to do this. I'm comfortable at home. Don't send me out. And so the whole part of the story is getting them to finally accept their mission and their thing. And I figured I could save a lot of trouble here. The lesson in all this is to just say, okay, so I get these calls from the goddess. This is the goddess speaking, and your next assignment, should you choose to accept it, and you got to accept it, because if you don't, they just cancel your show. So what's the point, right? So
Right.
just save yourself a lot of trouble and a lot of misery, and just accept the damn assignment already. So I've always done that.
I picture you in Gethsemane saying, "Just give me the cup already."
Yeah, exactly. It's exactly what I would do. It's what I do. And so far, so good, because the thing about it is, if you've ever watched any of these stories, if you take on one assignment, you keep getting better and better assignments. So it's not a bad thing to do.
It's a good gig.
I figured this out early on, and I've done okay by it. So I recommend it highly. People often come and ask me, well, as a wizard, what advice would you give me? What should I do? And I say, well, you should figure out what you're here for and then do it. That's the best advice I can give, and it's worked for me. So it was clear that we had a new assignment. We had to form a resistance and join the resistance as was going on, and be the wizard and the witch in the resistance. So we did. So we joined Indivisible, and Good Trouble and Surge, and started attending demonstrations and getting to know the people who organize them, and going to the organizational meetings. And before long, we got invited to have a table. And Rhiannon got this great idea. She went and ordered from Amazon costumes for Uncle Sam and Lady Liberty. So we show up in costumes as Uncle Sam and Lady Liberty. And people love it, and everybody wants to get their picture taken. We have tables with all kinds of literature, and we put out a lot of literature on interfaith materials as well, because we're really trying to promote First Amendment here, and this Christian nationalist movement. It isn't just Christians. Nobody else is going to be okay in their world. Everybody else goes except them. So we were talking to other Christians. So we're doing interfaith work, interfaith meetings, but we had this book, see, that we were working on, that we were planning on working on over this past winter last year, the Wizard's Guide to Witchy Women, and that's gotten put on the back burner while we deal with this stuff. So that's what this came out of. It's come out of our work um, in the field. And she got so inspired by putting this book out and the work on that she's now working on a follow-up guide, a support guide for LGBTQ folks, pagans in particular, under the current administration. I don't think we're capable of putting out one on immigrants, but I've been writing letters to the editor. So far, I've sent out 6 letters to the editor over the last couple of months, and they've all gotten printed in the local paper. So I'm rather pleased with that, because that allows me to feed my little provocative ideas into everybody who reads the paper around here. So this is pretty, and I recommend other people do the same thing. It's a great way to have major impact, how to reach the people who are not within the pagan bubble, people on the next layer out there, just write letters to the editor of your local paper.
We'll keep putting those letters in your box till your box gets full.
True. I'm thinking about that. I think that one of my boxes is interviews and editorials and things like this, that someday we'll make several bucks probably just out of those.
Well, let me know if you need a good editor.
Well, and you are such a wonderful editor. I am so glad we have you. I think that you are just top of the line, and please stay with Green Egg. We love you and we need you here.
No, you're going to have to burn it down and get rid of me.
Oh, good. Because not to worry about that. Yeah, I always say the same thing.
So everybody, all the wonderful things that Oz has mentioned, we're going to do our best to get links to them down there in the description so that you can find everything we've talked about today. Oz, do you have anything to add before we finalize?
Well, you're already ahead of me with getting the stuff online. I do hope that everybody goes to my website and checks stuff out. One of the newest products, for example, in the Gaian line, are these wonderful goblets and coffee cups that have Gaia on them, as well as different sizes of Gaias, including this really cute little mini version, which is great for your dashboard of your car. You can have a little Gaia on the dashboard of your car. And so I continue doing that kind of stuff. Check it out. Everything that I do and everything that I'm into is all on my website, oberonzell.com.
Okay.
And we just started a new website for Rhiannon. So there will be a rhiannonzell.com, and it'll have her stuff. But so far, we're just putting it together. Maureen is actually our website designer and put her together and I've got to do a banner for her and stuff like that, So
you showed the Millennium Gaia, and when we met, coming back full circle to what we first started talking about, that year that we met, I brought mine with me. Now, this was not a knockoff. This was the real deal. I was so excited for that. Good. And Eric and I were in a very financially disadvantaged situation then. And we had scrimped and saved to get this little statue because it meant so much to us. And you signed the bottom of it. And it's one of the things I saved from the fire. And I still got it on my mantelpiece. We use it so often in ritual. And I just appreciate it so much. And it's still got your Sharpie mark on the bottom. So thank you.
Well, you're very welcome. I am delighted that after what is it, 28 years now. Millennial Gaia continues to be a top seller. Now it's being marketed by the biggest marketer of statuary around, the ones you see whenever you go into metaphysical stores and all these beautiful statues, and they're put out by Pacific Trading Company,
Hmm.
and their Millennial Gaia is one of their top sellers, and I get royalty checks from them, and she is everywhere. And it has become hugely popular, and I'm so glad because this, to me, is the most important thing I've had to put out is the Gaia Vision. I mean, it took me 50 years, but I finally actually got the book out, which you reviewed very
I
nicely,
did.
of the whole story, the whole background. And it's got the statue picture on the cover as well.
And
But
that doesn't
I
show the
think,
beautiful back. The back of the statue is amazing.
yeah, it doesn't show in the book. You have to
No,
buy the statue to see it. Yeah, the back of it is amazing. It's got
it's
the
incredible.
entire evolution of life, although it would be easier to see on one of the bigger ones. But it's all there. It's the complete comprehensive everything you need to know about the living planet is embedded in this little statue,
Well,
and people dig it.
speaking of bigger ones, I saw one at PantheaCon that was probably what, 4 feet tall?
Yeah, that's my goal. That was only a prototype. The biggest one we've presently got is 2 feet tall, which is pretty nice size still.
Hmm.
But obviously, the bigger they are, the more expensive they are, and the more difficult it is to ship them. So while I really want to have a life size one out, um, we haven't yet been able to get our company to go for that. But it did take a long time for the technology to make it possible. The big one that you saw there was not done the way I needed to have it done, which is to laser scan the original and then enlarge or reduce it. Now we have that technology. So this one is a result of the laser scanning and 3D printing kind of stuff that we can do. And now that one can be done too. But that technology didn't exist. So they had been some folks over in China or whatever hand sculpted that one as best they could, but it wasn't quite right exactly. And I was very particular. I wanted it to be exact. So I just had to wait for the technology to catch up with my vision. And now that it's there, it's in the plans. Will be eventually the life size Gaia. And then, of course, I have a really spectacular idea of one that is twice life size. That would be a monumental statue in parks and stuff that would be the size so that a human, an adult person, would be the equivalent of a 2-year-old child in
Mm,
scale to this bigger statue. And you could go and sit on her lap, and just get the whole feeling.
Well,
I would like to have that.
keep that on there with the hot air balloon flying.
Right. So there's more bucket list stuff.
Yeah.
Right. Right.
Oz, it's been a joy to talk to you. Thank you for being here with us today and agreeing to this interview.
Well, thank you for having me, Katrina. It's delightful to have this kind of conversation. As you say, just like sitting around talking around the kitchen table. So,
Well, and for me, it's like sitting around talking at the kitchen table with your heroes. So I appreciate that. I also appreciate you taking a chance on me for Green Egg. I love being a part of such an amazing pagan institution and happy to be.
well, I'm just delighted to have you, and we all are. I think we've
Thank
got a
you.
wonderful staff. It's just
We
just
do.
amazing.
It's nicely it's coalesced very nicely. I'm happy
Right.
with
And
where
I
we
do
are.
look forward to getting the print editions available again so that people will be able to just push a button and have a print on demand of any of the electronic issues that you've edited, because that's part of that vision.
I love that too. Thank you, and you have a wonderful day. And I hope we get to do this again.
Oh, good. Oh, and I completely forgot to even talk about the Gray School of Wizardry.
Yes.
That's another whole thing.
Well, you know what? I'm the boss here, so we get to talk as long as we want to. Tell us
Oh,
about
well, gosh, how can I say this? Way back um, at the turn of the century or the turn of the millennium, practically, um, I was commissioned to write a book, my first book, by a publisher called New Page Publishers, and they said, oh, they wanted to have a book by me because I was known for writing magazine articles, but I'd never written a book before. But they said, oh, we really want you to write a book for us, and so they said, well, if you did write a book, what would it be about? Well, pitch us with an idea. And I had never given it a thought. I hadn't planned on writing a book. I said, all I can do, I'm publishing a magazine, I'm trying to deal with all that sort of stuff and writing editorials and things like that. And so I said, well, this Harry Potter thing is pretty popular right now. And maybe I'd like to write a book that would be like a textbook for a real live school of wizardry. If Hogwarts was a real school and not just a fantasy story, then it would need textbooks. And I'd like to write one. So they said, well, that's a great idea. Pitch us with that. So I did. And eventually, 2 years later, well, it took 2 years of writing, but came out my very first book, The Grimoire for the Apprentice Wizard, which is, in fact, a, uh, a textbook of real wizardry that has been hugely popular. People have really taken this and run with it, and it's been the bestseller for the publisher, New Page, and continues to be a top seller.
Well, it's a chunky monkey too. That's a fat book.
It is. It is. I had a lot of stuff to put in. I even followed up with a companion, for the Apprentice Wizard, because I had so much more stuff I wanted to say. Well, as I was writing the book for this textbook for a school, I realized, well, I needed a school for it to be a textbook of, you know. So I figured, well, this is another one of those assignments.
Give me the cup.
Yep, exactly. So, I took it and started the Great School of Wizardry, and I conceived it out of my imagination because long ago, back around the same time we were starting the Church of All Worlds, I also had a notion of a school. I mean, the Church of All Worlds was inspired by a science fiction novel called Stranger in a Strange Land. But there was another story that was came out about that time in the mid '60s that I also was inspired by. Enough to I took every course in education in college. I got a teacher's certificate. I actually taught school physically in let's see, preschool, grade school, high school, and college. I taught courses at all these levels for a number of years because I had the idea for a school too. And I had a kid, that was just born at that time, 1963. It was my son Brian was born. So, but the school that inspired me was not Hogwarts. This was long before that. It was Professor Xavier's School for Gifted Youngsters.
X-Men.
That was the school I wanted to have, and those are the kind of students I wanted to have. For those of you who may not catch the reference, this is the X-Men mythos, but hopefully you should all know it because it should be a universal reference. So that was the model that I had in mind when I put this together. But the thing about it was with the Harry Potter phenomenon, I realized the world might be ready for this, which it had not been all those many years earlier. So in 2024, no, 2004, this is last year's. In 2004, we opened our virtual doors to the Grey School of Wizardry. And I designed it as an online school, created the whole everything. I designed the artwork, I designed all the graphics, the schools, the structure, the classes, recruited the teachers, everything. Designed the whole entire shebang out of my own experience and my imagination. And we opened our virtual doors expecting a flood of teenagers.
You got old people, didn't you?
We did. We did. I was looking for all these teenagers to show up on the 1st of August on Lunaside of 2004. And all these grown-ups and old people were showing up. And they're saying, hey, this wasn't around when I was a kid and I wanted it. So now it's here. I want it. So we immediately had to regroup, and rethink a whole lot of the structure and designs for adults, not just for kids. So we had to create a complete adult programming and systems and everything. And we did within a very short time. And then a virtual campus, came up with the idea for how to create a virtual campus and all of it. And I was headmaster for many years. And a couple of years ago, I had finally selected and trained up my best apprentice and protege, Nicholas Kingsley, and I was able to formally, in a beautiful ceremony, to pass the torch to the new headmaster and officially get to retire. So I'm now headmaster emeritus, much like I'm publisher emeritus for Green Egg. See, this is my idea of what you do. When you create something, you got to start looking for somebody to pass it on to. That's the whole point. To me,
Mhm.
power is not something to acquire, it's something to pass on. So, and I've got infinite creativity. I don't want to, I don't have time to just get stuck in doing one thing, you know? I've got to want to move on to the next. So I pass on the church, I pass on the green egg, I pass on the school. You know, everything that I do, I look for someone to pass it on to. But it's a trick to find the perfect person. I got the perfect person at a green egg, and I got the perfect person to be headmaster of the gray school, which is interesting because when he joined it and first became qualified to be a teacher, he was just barely 21. And that was 40 years ago. I mean, that was 20 years ago. I mean, not 40, it was 20 years ago. And, you know, I still think of him as this 21-year-old kid, see,
Sure.
but he's not. And he's done an amazing job. And he's taken the virtual campus to incredible new levels and now has a physical campus. We have a beautiful mansion in Whitehall, New York, with classrooms and dormitories and stuff, and getting involved in the local community and having community events. And the virtual campus we call VGSW, virtual, you know, Gray School of Wizardry, VGSW, has been winning awards and has come to the attention of the president of Linden Labs, which is the people who run the Second Life thing. And they want to use the Gray School as a flagship model for what you can do using their stuff for education, because that was the vision he had, not just to play games, but to actually use as a vehicle for education. Because people can be anywhere in the world and still come to classes there and sit around together and get to know and meet each other and their teachers. And we just had a board meeting yesterday, and there I am sitting in this meeting room with a bunch of other board members, all in our avatar forms. You know, it's quite a wonderful thing, and I'm very, very proud of this too. So yeah, this is another one of my proud achievements. Let's say I got Church of All Worlds, the
Hmm.
Pagan Movement, polyamory,
Yep.
living unicorns,
Yep.
um, green egg, the Gray School of Wizardry, a bunch of books,
Bunch of books.
the Gaia thesis.
Yep. Which
Um,
is a whole other conversation.
yeah, it's another whole. We didn't even get around to talking
We
about that.
did
See, we'll have
not.
to have more interviews. There's just too damn much, you know. I've been
I got
around a
nothing
long
but
time.
time, except for I would say maybe 2 weeks out of every 3 months when I'm obsessed with what we're doing with green egg.
Ah,
Otherwise,
yes. Well, that's coming up,
got
isn't it?
time. Yes, it is.
Yeah.
Winter solstice. That'll be our next one that comes out.
Well, we'll leave something to talk about for future times. There'll always
I'd
be more.
love to anytime. Thank you
And
so
you
much.
should interview, and you got to do an interview with Rhiannon, and you got to do an
Yeah,
interview with Nicholas Kingsley,
I'd
who is
love
an
to.
amazing interviewer. He's great.
That sounds wonderful. I have not had the pleasure of meeting him yet. Kat spoke of him from time to time, but I
Oh
do
yeah.
not know him.
Well, you will.
That
He's great.
sounds wonderful. Well, thank you,
Okay.
Thanks so much for being here, and I look forward to what comes next.
So do I.
Take
So
care.
do I.
Bye bye.
All right. Live long and prosper.